A man of 30 was doing a great deal of spree drinking. He was very nervous in the morning after these bouts and quieted himself with more liquor. He was ambitious to succeed in business, but saw that he would get nowhere if he drank at all. Once he started, he had no control whatever. A pretty good definition of an alcoholic, isn't it? And we can all say yes to that because we've all experienced it. He made up his mind that until he had been successful in business and had retired, he would not touch another drop. An exceptional man, he remained bone dry for 25 years. Can you imagine spending 25 years with untreated alcoholism, how miserable that would be? How much longer he was able to go on that, I don't know. And so he quit drinking. He remained bone dry for 25 years, retired at the age of 55 after a successful and happy business career. Then he fell victim to a belief, which practically every alcoholic has, that his long period of sobriety and self-discipline had qualified him to drink as other men. My gosh, how many times have we heard that story? I know people with 12 and 15 years of real good sobriety. But when the thought began to cross their mind that they had to learn enough about themselves, they were afraid enough of the consequences of drinking, they'd fallen into the clutches of these people who tell them if you keep it green, you can stay sober. If you can't remember your last drunk, you haven't had it, and all that nonsense. And pretty soon the mind takes back over. But we have to remember that alcoholism still sits there. It's like those horrible four horsemen that we studied in chapter 11. You know, they're outside having drag races out in the parking lot right now, just waiting for us to fall back a little bit spiritually, because we cannot deal with this stuff on our own. And if we don't have God in our lives, we don't make it. Okay, so he thought he'd been qualified to drink as other men, and out came his carpet slippers and a bottle. Anybody here old enough to remember what a carpet slipper is? This is not somebody who, I can see somebody back there with gray hair remembers. This is not somebody in this room who has a big slip and falls down on the carpet. Carpets, now we just call them slippers, carpet slippers. I'm not sure whether, they don't think they were made out of carpet or anything, and it isn't the same as a carpetbagger. Somewhere along the line, carpet slippers became the term. And he had his bottle. You can imagine, too, a smoking jacket, probably velvet, red velvet lapels. In 2 months, he was in a hospital, puzzled and humiliated. He tried to regulate his drinking for a while, making several trips to the hospital meantime. Then, gathering all his forces, he attempted to stop altogether and found he could not. Every means of solving his problem, which money could buy, was at his disposal. Every attempt failed. You notice the every means of solving his problem which money could buy. You see, that doesn't say anything about us, does it? Because you can't buy AA. If you had $10 billion, you could not buy what we have here. All the human solutions cost money. AA is free. Every attempt failed. Though a robust man at retirement, he went to pieces quickly and was dead within 4 years. This is not at all an unusual story. The progression of the disease is astonishing in the sense that it seems, let me tell you, I've also seen this, which is, you may not believe it, but I'm convinced that it was true, that people who were totally abstinent into their 30s, but who were ready, once they started drinking, they would have been one of us. In their 30s or early 40s, they'd start drinking, and within a year they'd be hopeless, helpless alcoholics. The disease somehow or another had progressed that much, or either that or it progresses that rapidly. I've seen lots and lots of people who have retired, perhaps have lost their husband or wife. They never drank before in their lives, and they start drinking in their 60s or 70s, and within a very short time, they're totally, hopelessly wiped out by booze. Chronic alcoholics. So there's something going on here, whether it happens to be some sort of a mental time clock or whether it's physical, I don't know. One of the people I sponsor is one of the guys who was he was first on the moon. He was number 2 man in Apollo 11. And he had not had anything to drink for all the time in his earlier life. I think he was 35 when he finally arrived on the moon. And then after this, all the parades and all the hoopla and everything, after about a year, other people were getting the headlines. And he started doing the lecture circuit, and he started drinking. Within 1 year, he was a hopeless, helpless alcoholic. I mean, nearly wiped out. So I saw that happen with my own eyes. By the way, I'm not breaking his anonymity. He's already done that. He has chosen to be out front. So in any event, these are the things that I've observed, and whether or not any of these things follow a set pattern, I don't know. But I'm convinced of this, that once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. It does not go away, it does not get better, and there is every reason to believe that as we go through life, it simply gets worse. Now, I've been sober over 37 years, and I shudder to think what would happen to me if I started drinking again. I doubt if I'd last 2 weeks. Okay, page 33 now, first full paragraph. This case contains a powerful lesson. Most of us have believed that if we remained sober for a long stretch, we could thereafter drink normally. But here's a man who at 55 years found he was just where he'd left off at 30. We've seen the truth demonstrated again and again. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. Commencing to drink after a period of sobriety, we are in a short time as bad as ever. If we are planning to stop drinking, there must be no reservation of any kind, nor any lurking notion that someday we will be immune to alcohol. That's the rule. That's the first step rule. And that's the reason that so many people believe that they have worked the steps. They believe that they've taken the first step. Somebody has told them that the only thing required, the first step, is that they be honest, that the so-called principle behind the first step is honesty. That's balderdash. Absolute nonsense. First of all, we follow the directions in this book, and we read the book. We read the book. Not part of the book, the whole book. This is not a Reader's Digest. We read every word, we read it all the way through. We follow the directions in chapter 7, which tell us to do that. We go to meetings. We talk extensively to people who have solid long-term sobriety, get them to sit down and share with us. Most importantly, we begin to pray. Even though we don't believe necessarily, we pray for the willingness to believe. We pray to whom it may concern. We pray to God if you're there, but we pray. And when we do these things, what happens is that we receive the great gift of the concession to our innermost selves that we are alcoholic. And we receive the great gift of the acceptance as a matter of absolute fact that we can never safely drink alcohol again, and that we have absolutely no reservations whatsoever on that score. This paragraph then is something which we need to burn into our foreheads. If we are planning to stop drinking, there must be no reservation of any kind, nor any lurking notion that someday he will be immune to alcohol. And you say, well, wait a second, everybody says that the first step, the second part of the first step is this, that's simply a description of what has happened. It is not. It is not the test of alcoholism. It is not the test of alcoholism. Because everybody's life is unmanageable to some extent, and most people, their lives are unmanageable by them to any extent. What that is a phrase which leads us inevitably to the third step, where we learn in the third step that our problems of our own making, that they arise out of ourselves, and that hereafter in this drama of life we're going to have to quit playing God and let God be the director. That's what that phrase leads us to. We are not capable of managing our lives ourselves. But we cannot test our alcoholism, the disease, by determining whether our life has become unmanageable. But we can test it by going to meetings, reading the big book, speaking at length with people and with good sobriety, and praying. And when we do that, we're granted the gift of concession to our innermost selves that we're alcoholic, and the gift of acceptance to the fact that we can never safely drink alcohol again so long as we let it. Let's go on page 33. Young people may be encouraged by this man's experience to think they can stop, as he did, on their own willpower. We doubt if many of them can do it, because none will really want to stop, and hardly one of them, because of the peculiar mental twist already acquired, will find he can win out. Several of our crowd, men of 30 or less, have been drinking only a few years. They found themselves as helpless as those who had been drinking 20 years. And that, there doesn't seem to be any time limits on this. The swiftness, the speed with which alcohol takes over and masters us will vary from person to person. We like to think that we can go on drinking for a good many years and still be able to stop, and some of us can. But the real alcoholic is in trouble almost from the very beginning. I've heard so many people's stories that tell about what is tantamount to an inability to stop right from the first drink. The obsession being so strong right from that point on. And I believe it. I can see how that could happen. Going down on page 33, to be gravely affected, one does not necessarily have to drink a long time nor take the quantity some of us have. This is particularly true of women. Potential female alcoholics often turn into the real thing and are gone beyond recall in a few years. Certain drinkers who would be greatly insulted if called alcoholics are astonished at their inability to stop. We who are familiar with the symptoms see large numbers of potential alcoholics among young people everywhere, but try and get them to see it. Now, of course, remember when this was written in 1939 or 1938, 39. And when I came in 64, there were very few young people even then. And the proportion of women in the fellowship was substantially less than it is today. So there have been a lot of changes. I remember going into that first meeting at the Ohio Street group in West Los Angeles and looking around and seeing all these old guys sitting there, a lot of them smoking cigars and pipes and just looking real solemn. I thought, man, I walked into some kind of a wake or something here. This is crazy. What the hell am I doing? I was only 36 years old, and I was one of the younger people there. But this changed very rapidly. I'll tell you, one of the things that seemed to accelerate the change was when the government finally got around to determining that alcoholism was a disease and that it could be covered by federal money, and the insurance companies decided it could be covered by health insurance. And then people started, and the treatment centers opened up. And with the treatment centers came a huge influx of younger people. And thank God for that. That's one of the great things that happened because of the founding of treatment centers. If you go into one today, you'll find a preponderance of young people in the treatment centers. And that's good, because the quicker we can get stopped, the longer our spiritual life will be, and the longer we can be productive human beings and serve God. Also, we know for a fact that we get past a certain point and it becomes increasingly difficult, if not impossible, to stop. And sometimes when we want to stop and we can't, we die before we can find a way to stop. So the quicker we can get at this stuff, the better, as far as I'm concerned. Now there's another thing that we've learned, and we're going to, we need to recall it, because we learned this back in chapter 2, that there are heavy drinkers who can in fact stop or modify on their own if they're given sufficient motivation or reason to do so. And there are lots and lots of those folks in AA. They are not by definition alcoholics because they can stop drinking on their own given sufficient reason. In other words, they have not yet reached the point of being hopeless and helpless and powerless in the face of the obsession compulsion to drink. Nevertheless, each of those folks is welcome, and many have become extremely valuable members of this fellowship. If you are talking to somebody who's telling you that they didn't have to read the book and they didn't have to work the steps and they just come to meetings, you may be talking to somebody who really didn't need to read the book, really didn't need to work the steps, just needed sufficient reason to stop, and they were able to do so. And of course, we don't know when someone comes in the door, especially younger people. They may just have had one DUI and got a nudge from the judge, but we're not going to worry about that. We don't make any kind of examination to see whether somebody truly belongs here or not. We offer them the 12 steps. And there's an interesting thing going on there, you know. The 12 steps are really for every human being, aren't they? These are spiritual principles which work in everybody's life. The real question is, have you been motivated to a point where you're willing to work them? Because it requires of us, for the first time, that we get honest with ourselves, that we dig deeply, and that we make a full and complete surrender to a higher power. And for a lot of people, the only way that ever happens is with the gift of desperation, the last house on the block type of thing. I have nowhere else to go, I'm going to try this. Hopefully, you and I will be offering such a wonderful example of God's power working in our lives, and His way of life, and His Spirit, and His love, that they will want what we have, and will be willing to do whatever it takes to get it. And many do. And the thing is, we never know who this is going to be, do we? Every time we try to pick and choose among those who may or may not get it, we're going to be wrong. Because there's no way to know. So therefore, because we're here to carry God's message to His people, we're going to offer the message to everybody. We're going to offer our help to anybody who asks for it. And we're going to do our very best to carry the message as we know the message to be. And when we do that, we stay sober, we grow spiritually, and every once in a while somebody does get it. And what a wonderful day that is. And we go down here on page 34, second full paragraph. For those who are unable to drink moderately, the question is how to stop altogether. We are assuming, of course, that the reader desires to stop. Whether such a person can quit upon a non-spiritual basis depends upon the extent to which he's already lost the power to choose whether he will drink or not. That's a real important sentence. Understand what it's saying. Whether the person who walks in the door can stop on a non-spiritual basis depends upon the extent to which he's already lost the power to choose whether he will drink or not. The person who still has the power to choose can stop without needing the 12 steps. And there are lots of these folks in these rooms, and that's fine. It's wonderful that they're here. But those of us who are real alcoholics, who are chronics, must have a spiritual basis for our recovery. Otherwise, we do not recover. Many of us felt that we had plenty of character. There was a tremendous urge to cease forever, yet we found it impossible. This is the baffling feature of alcoholism as we know it. Listen to this now. This utter inability to leave it alone, no matter how great the necessity or the wish. Now that's alcoholism. And when that is present, that means that the person who is afflicted with that is an alcoholic. Clear, pure and simple. Top of the page. As we look back, we feel we had gone on drinking many years beyond the point where we could quit on our own willpower. If anyone questions whether he has entered this dangerous area, let him try leaving liquor alone for 1 year. If he's a real alcoholic and very far advanced, there is scant chance of success. In the early days of our drinking, we occasionally remained sober for a year or more, becoming serious drinkers again later. But you may be able to stop for a considerable period. You may yet be potential alcoholic. We think few to whom this book will appeal can stay dry anything like a year. Some will be drunk the day after making their resolutions, most of them within a few weeks. Well, that's a pretty tough way to find out if we're an alcoholic or not. There's another test which isn't in the book, but I'll just pass it along to you. And this relies upon the fact that we've come to understand that if we take one drink, it sets off the phenomenon of craving. If we're a real alcoholic, the question is not whether we can stop drinking for good. The question is whether once we start, if we can't stop. Because the hallmark of alcoholism, of course, is this allergy. And as Dr. Silkworth told us, we can never safely drink alcohol again because each time we do it, it sets off this bodily demand for more alcohol. So here's a suggestion: if you've got somebody there that you're trying to talk to or help, you might ask them this. Now, to be very honest about this, would you be able to do this? To drink just 2 drinks every day, no more, no less, for a month. 2 drinks every day, no more, no less, for a whole month. And a real alcoholic, being honest about it, would have to say, no, I know I couldn't do that, because they will know that even if they use supreme willpower for a couple of days, those 2 drinks would trigger such a strong need and desire and obsession to drink that it would overpower them no matter what they may wish to do. The idea is not to shove somebody out the door and say, try to stay sober for a year, and if you can't, then come back because you're a real alcoholic. We don't know that. But the person who comes in here seeking help, who cannot stop drinking on their own, we're going to offer them the help. And we're going to ask them to read the book, because the book was written for them. If they find themselves in these pages, perhaps they will be able to get past their denial. And that's what we're going to find now as we go forward in this 3rd chapter. Down at the bottom of page 34. How then shall we help our readers determine to their own satisfaction whether they are one of us? The experiment of quitting for a period of time will be helpful, but we think we can render an even greater service to alcoholic sufferers and perhaps to the medical fraternity. So we shall describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking, for obviously this is the crux of the problem. And of course it is. Of course it is. You see, we talked about this before, and it became obvious when reading the doctor's opinion and reading Bill's story in 2nd chapter, that we do have this physical allergy. We do have this reaction to alcohol that normal people do not have. But that is that reaction to alcohol is not triggered unless we ingest alcohol. So the real question is, are we able to avoid that first drink? Even though we know that we are powerless over it. And what is it that makes us powerless over that first drink? What is this insanity? Going on top of page 35, here's some more questions which are pertinent to this whole idea. What sort of thinking dominates an alcoholic who repeats time after time the desperate experiment of the first drink? Friends who have reasoned with him after a spree which has brought him to the point of divorce or bankruptcy are mystified when he walks directly into a saloon. Why does he? But what is he thinking? That's the question, and unfortunately, that's the question so many in the outside world, outside of AA, will ask. What's wrong with these people? Don't they understand? Don't they ever learn? Over and over again, they have one disaster after another. Why don't they just stop? What more has to happen to that stupid guy before he finally figures out he can't drink? Because they simply don't understand that we are powerless over that next drink. We are powerless over that thinking which lies to us and tells us that we can get away with it, that it'll be okay this time, that we can drink like other people, that we can just go have one or two because we deserve it, and on and on and on. The self-delusion run rampant. Let's see, we got these examples, and maybe these examples are going to help us to understand what we're dealing with here, this insanity of the first drink. Our first example is a friend we shall call Jim. This man has a charming wife and family. He inherited a lucrative automobile agency. He had a commendable World War record. He is a good salesman. Everybody likes him. He's an intelligent man, normal so far as we can see, except for a nervous disposition. He did no drinking until he was 35. In a few years he became so violent when intoxicated he had to be committed. On leaving the asylum he came into contact with us. We told him what we knew of alcoholism and the answer we had found. He made a beginning. His family was reassembled and he began to work as a salesman for the business he had lost through drinking. All went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. Remember where we first heard that phrase? That's back in Bill's story, where Bill tells us that if an alcoholic fails to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he cannot survive. And so all went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. And of course that also refers, does it not, to our 10th and 11th and 12th steps. To his consternation, he found himself drunk half a dozen times in rapid succession. On each of these occasions we worked with him, reviewing carefully what had happened. He agreed that he was a real alcoholic and in serious condition. He knew he faced another trip to the asylum if he kept on. Moreover, he would lose his family for whom he had a great deep affection. Now this guy's really set up now, because he's got a lot of knowledge about himself. He's got a lot of knowledge about what drinking will do to him. He's afraid of the consequences of drinking. He's been filled with the fear of what might happen to him if he drinks again. And yet, let's see what happens. Page 36, yet he got drunk again. We asked him to tell us exactly how it happened. This is his story. I came to work on Tuesday morning. I remember I felt irritated that I had to be a salesman for a concern I once owned. I had a few words with the boss, but nothing serious. Then I decided to drive into the country and see one of my prospects for a car. On the way I felt hungry, so I stopped at a roadside place where they have a bar. I had no intention of drinking. I just thought I would get a sandwich. I also had the notion I might find a customer for a car in this place, which was familiar, for I had been going to it for years. Notice that there's no bud here building up to drink. That's one of those chart-like things they keep around the treatment centers. I suppose it's probably true for some people, but it is not universally so. We're going to see what happened here. He had no intention of getting a drink. He was not upset about anything. He was looking for a customer. He wanted to sell a car. And he'd eaten this place many times during his sober life and never had a problem there. I sat down at the table and ordered a sandwich and a glass of milk. Still no thought of drinking. I ordered another sandwich and decided to have another glass of milk. Suddenly, the thought crossed my mind that if I were to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk, it couldn't hurt me on a full stomach. I ordered a whiskey and poured it into the milk. I vaguely sensed I was not being any too smart, but felt reassured as I was taking the whiskey on a full stomach. The experiment went so well, I ordered another whiskey and poured it into more milk. That didn't seem to bother me, so I tried another. Thus started one more journey to the asylum for Jim. Here was the threat of commitment, the loss of family and position, to say nothing of that intense mental and physical suffering which drinking always caused him. He had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic, yet all reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside in favor of the foolish idea that he could take whiskey if only he mixed it with milk. Now, it's so important for us to understand what's going on here, because there's so much loose talk around these rooms about how we can get sober if we just remember how bad it was when we had our last drunk, or this so-called keeping it green stuff, which all boils down to the fear of the consequences of getting drunk. I don't ever want to go back to that. I hear this all the time. Well, that's good, but what are you doing about it? That's the question. This is not anything that has to do with state of mind. It has everything to do with the work that we do. The whole program of Alcoholics Anonymous is based upon effort, upon actions that we take. And those actions lead inevitably to a spiritual awakening. And they place us directly in God's pocket. We're nestled in His arms. It's the only place we're safe. And if we're in a fool's paradise when we think that somehow or another we'll stay sober, if we make sure we don't have any secrets, if we pull down our pants in public every chance we get, if every time we go to a meeting it's whine and cry and moan and groan and bitch, and we applaud others who do it and tell them how wonderful it is they're being so honest. The fact is that we do have things happen to us that we need to write about, which is the first thing we do, and then talk about them to our spiritual advisor or our sponsor, and then we take them to God and we ask Him for help. We're not going to let those things simply sit there and eat us alive. No, 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 that's not the point. But Alcoholics Anonymous is not group therapy. And the person sitting up here is not a facilitator. Nor do many of us have any kind of a degree whatsoever or a license of any kind to do anything psychologically. We're here because we wish to share with you what we've learned and have you share with us what you've learned about recovery. And because we are powerless, we must find a power greater than ourselves which will solve our problem. And we do that by working the steps. That's how simple it is. And everything else is a smokescreen. And this is a fool's paradise. These are blind alleys that we run down, thinking that we're in sobriety, that we're recovering, and that we're helping other people recover. If we want to help somebody recover, we take them to the book and we say, whatever's in here, you better do it. This is what I'm doing. It's working for me. Follow the directions. Simple kit of spiritual tools. Pick them up and use them. Find a power greater than yourself which will solve your problem. Nothing else will work. If we did not need to be on a spiritual path, following spiritual principles and living our lives according to those principles, there'd be no reason for AA. We would be able to take the human solution, recover, and go on our merry way. That's just the truth of it. Let's see what else is page 37. Whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. How can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? I want to remind you where else we heard this, the same message. Please go to page 24. I know that you probably are getting bored hearing this stuff over and over again, but it's so important that we understand the truth about what's going on with us, the truth about recovery. What is recovery here? It is not human solutions. It's not New Age AA. It's the stuff that we find in this book. First full paragraph on page 24, again in italics. The fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. That's the truth. And so the solution is clear, isn't it? We work the steps, we find a power greater than ourselves, and we surrender to that power, and we begin to do that power's will, and we begin to seek that will. And when we do that, our whole life changes. It's just that simple. Page 37 now. You may think this is an extreme case. To us, it's not far-fetched. But this kind of thinking has been characteristic of every single one of us. We've sometimes reflected more than Jim did upon the consequences, but there was always the curious mental phenomenon that parallel with our sound reasoning. There inevitably, listen to this now, there inevitably ran some insanely trivial excuse for taking the first drink. Our sound reasoning failed to hold us in check. The insane idea won out. Next day we would ask ourselves in all earnestness and sincerity how it could have happened. Now this is what is meant by the second step, that we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. This is the insanity. There is nothing rational about this. There's nothing that A and 1 and 2 don't equal 3 here. A and B don't precede C. They're all mixed up. It's insane. In some circumstances, we've gone out deliberately to get drunk, feeling ourselves justified by nervousness, anger, worry, depression, jealousy, or the like. But even in this type of beginning, we are obliged to admit that our justification for a spree was insanely insufficient in the light of what always happened. We now see that when we begin to drink deliberately instead of casually, there was little serious or effective thought during the period of premeditation of what the terrific consequences might be. It is useless to tell us to remember how terrible that last drunk was, because when the obsession compulsion hits us, our minds tell us it ain't so, or we simply forget it, push it aside, deny it, rationalize it, and we drink. And we can't understand why. The answer is simple. We're powerless. Alcohol has us by the throat. And this is true of so many people who are addicted to drugs as well. Same thing happens with them, I believe. I've never had the experience myself, but from all the testimony I've heard, it sounds to me like exactly the same thing happens. Some of you may remember having this experience. You go on a Friday and you've been sober for a while and you get paid, and you're on your way home and you get a chance to either make a left turn to home or a right turn down to the bar or the dope man. And all of a sudden you realize the car has turned by itself and headed for the bar or the dope man. You say, what in the world's going on here? Why didn't I go home? Because we have a disease, and the disease rules us, and we have no power over it. That's why we have to have God's power in our life. Nothing else will work. I promise you. Nothing else will work. Let's go on. These next paragraphs are an allegory. This is not a true story. It is a made-up mythological story which is designed to teach us a lesson. And most people who read this who are real alcoholics see themselves absolutely in this little story. Our behavior is as absurd and incomprehensible with respect to the first drink as that of an individual with a passion, say, for jaywalking. He gets a thrill out of skipping in front of fast-moving vehicles. He enjoys himself for a few years in spite of friendly warnings. Up to this point, you would label him as a foolish chap having queer ideas of fun. Luck then deserts him, and he's slightly injured several times in succession. You would expect him, if he were normal, to cut it out. Presently, he's hit again, and this time has a fractured skull. Within a week after leaving the hospital, a fast-moving trolley car breaks his arm. He tells you he has decided to stop jaywalking for good, but in a few weeks he breaks both legs. On through the years, this conduct continues, accompanied by his continual promises to be careful or to keep off the streets altogether. Finally, he can no longer work, his wife gets a divorce, and he's held up to ridicule. He tries every known means to get the jaywalking idea out of his head. He shuts himself up in an asylum, hoping to mend his ways. But the day comes out, he races in front of a fire engine, which breaks his back. Such a man would be crazy, wouldn't he? The story of the 900-pound gorilla. Everybody, not everybody remembers that story. Alcoholic went to a house, went into the house, went up to this white door. He opened the door up, and inside was a 900-pound gorilla with a baseball bat. Just beat the hell out of him, beat him right down onto the floor, and then kicked him out in the street. Next day, he was covered up. He crawled back in, went to the same door, and the 900-pound gorilla beat him up again. Smashed him down with a baseball bat and tossed him out. Next day, he went back, went to the door, opened the door, and the gorilla wasn't there. So he went looking for the gorilla. Is that insane? Is that any different from all of us? That 900-pound gorilla sitting out there at the bar, at the liquor store, down at the dope man's. We just keep going back and getting beaten up over and over and over again. And one day, that gorilla will hit us a little bit too hard and we die. Page 38, third full paragraph. You may think our illustration is too ridiculous, but is it? We who have been through the ringer have to admit if we substitute alcoholism for jaywalking, the illustration would fit us exactly. However intelligent we may have been in other respects, where alcohol has been involved, we have been strangely insane. Strong language, but isn't it true? Some of you are thinking, yes, but what you tell us is true, but it doesn't fully apply. We have some of these symptoms, but we've not gone to the extremes you fellas did, nor are we likely to. For we understand ourselves so well after what you have told us that such things cannot happen again. We've not lost everything in life through drinking, and we certainly do not intend to. Hey guys, thanks a lot for the information. This may be true of certain non-alcoholic people, who, though drinking foolishly and heavily at the present time, are able to stop or moderate, because their brains and bodies have not been damaged as ours were. But the actual or potential alcoholic, with hardly an exception, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. Wow, that's so important. You know, the human solution depends upon self-knowledge, doesn't it? We get so imbued with all this knowledge about ourselves and why we drank and all this stuff, the knowledge about alcohol and alcoholism and all that. And the idea is that if we learn all these things and we learn what our so-called triggers are and all that, we won't drink again. It doesn't work. We will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. This is a point we wish to emphasize and re-emphasize, to smash home upon our alcoholic readers as it has been revealed to us out of bitter experience. Let us take another illustration. Now, there are a couple of things now that are becoming clear. And these we need to burn into our consciousness and hang on to them because they're true. We're not going to get sober on the basis of self-knowledge. And we don't get sober on the basis of fear of the consequences of drinking. Neither one of these have kept us sober in the past, and they are not going to keep us sober now. Some people like to dwell upon this idea of the fear of the consequence of the next drink as if it had some magic quality to it. And I don't have any quarrel with the idea that right at the beginning, when we first came in the door, that fear may be a very powerful motivator at that point. But we cannot rely upon fear to keep us sober. You see, fear is utilized by so much of our society as the way of controlling people, the way of making sure that various groups stay together, fear of the consequences of breaking rules, fear of the consequences of sin, for example, or of not following some particular church protocol. And all of these things are fear-inducing, and they're ways that human beings have found that they can manipulate each other and control each other. And here in AA, we stay completely away from any fears that are institutionalized. But we have to recognize that we are going to die if we don't stop drinking because we have a fatal disease. That's a fact. It is not something which is manufactured. We didn't make any rule that if you don't stop drinking, you die. The rule is already established by the fact that our disease is deadly. And so when we talk about these things, we're not talking about something which is used to frighten anybody into sobriety. We know that doesn't work. It does not work. As a matter of fact, if you look at it closely, you find that by the time we reach the fourth step, we have discovered something of incredible importance to us. That fear is our enemy, not our friend. That fear is that evil force which has warped and perverted our natural instincts, which has caused us to have our minds which no longer function properly because our instincts are warped clear out of countenance. And so we begin to recognize that fear is our enemy, not our friend, and that we have to stay free of fear. Why in the world, on the one hand, would we say stay sober because of fear? On the other hand, stay free of fear. Does that make sense? In fact, none of this stuff makes sense, because the basic ideas are all here in the book, and they never vary. They've never gone away. They've never been changed. They're always here. That our recovery from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body is dependent entirely upon our seeking and surrendering to a higher power. Getting rid of the things in ourselves which block us off from Him. Getting rid of the defects of character and the insanities and the guilts which block us from God. Making a full surrender. And then staying there. We are told the truth that God will give us everything we need, including sobriety, if we do two things: if we stay close to Him and perform His work well. That's the way it really works. And when we forget that, and when we listen to the siren song of those who propose the easier, softer way, I feel sorry for us. Because those of us who do that run a very grave risk of not recovering, consequently losing our lives. That's just a fact. It's not to cause anybody any fear, just accept it as a fact. We can't stop on our own. We have to have God's help. And the big book and the steps give us the way that we do that. When we come back next week, we're going to take up the